Okay, it's probably about time to finally start this final. Oh, man. I'm not exactly looking forward to this one. What's it even about again? I don't even know. What is great about American political thought?
Um, well, I guess you'd be the expert. What makes American political thought great? Okay, so all jokes aside, what does make American political thought great? This is clearly not an easy question to answer, borderline an impossible question to answer. But I think there is actually an answer. And actually, it boils down to just one word, but got to keep that engagement up. So we're going to hold off on that answer for just a moment because we have to address why this is so hard to answer. The issue essentially boils down to whose voice counts. American political thought is an extremely diverse and wide ranging set of ideals. Even things that most Americans take for granted as Americanisms, democracy, equality, freedom, are not necessarily uniform ideas. I mean, just take a look at Robert George. He's not exactly the biggest fan of freedom, at least individual freedom. But he's still equally an American scholar. He's still equally in the pantheon of American political thinkers. So, how do we come to any conclusions about a system as diverse as one that can produce Frederick Douglass and one that can produce Michelangelo? As diverse as one that can produce Malcolm X and O'Cannibals? How do we come to any sort of conclusions, much less say what is great about a system this all encompassing, this hard to define? Well, actually, there may lie the very way to define it. Now, before we get into why these contradictions are important, I think it's important for us to understand just truly how diverse American political thought is. And there are perhaps no two thinkers that exemplify this diversity more than George Fitzhugh and Malcolm X. Now, one of those thinkers you've probably heard of, and the other one you probably have not. So let's start with George Fitzhugh, who, quite frankly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on. He was, in no uncertain terms, a slavery defender. In fact, his most famous essay, and really the only thing people remember him for today, was a defense of slavery. In fact, it was an argument that slavery was better than the alternative. Here are some quotes for him. Like I said, I don't want to get too much into him. It's just important that you know his position. Now, Malcolm X, on the other hand, was obviously not this. Here are some quotes from his famous The Ballot or the Bullet speech, in which he argues that black people have been systematically excluded from American life, and that they still are today, a century after George Fitzhugh. Now, it's pretty clear in the modern day who was correct and who wasn't, but that's not really important for today's discussion. What's really important is we recognize just truly how diverse those two opinions are, and the fact that they both still sit comfortably inside of the American political thought canon. Okay, but I see the counter argument already. Does anybody really agree with the Fitzhughlian premise that wage slavery is somehow worse than racial slavery? And hell, one of the quotes I put of Malcolm X on the screen literally says he doesn't consider himself American. So, fair.
this may have been an extreme example. So let's look at something a little more nuanced. How about Robert George? Robert George absolutely is still an important American political thinker to this day. Many people follow his beliefs. He's often considered the sort of theoretical mind behind the modern right wing today. Robert George essentially argued in his paper on the Declaration of Independence that American freedom, its liberty, is derived from what he calls the freedom for, its virtue. Essentially, Robert George says that the American government should not be supporting freedom just because it's individual freedom. It should be supporting freedom that benefits society, the common good. And an important note here is that almost always means what Robert George thinks is the common good, which is essentially American Catholicism. Important side. But then let's look at another important American thinker, one that absolutely people still follow today, Frederick Douglass. In his famous On the 4th of July speech, or what does the 4th of July mean to a slave, he essentially argues that you can't debate the notion of slavery, that there is no proper way to justify slavery on the basis that there is an inherent individual freedom, that people, regardless of skin tone, are protected by the Constitution. So here we have two thinkers, both making constitutional founders-based arguments for entirely separate ideas. One says that what is good, what is free, what we should be striving for is based on a very narrow interpretation of what the government ought to be doing, Robert George. The other says that what is good, what is freedom, what we should be striving for is based on the individual's concept of liberty, that everybody is entitled to freedom from the government. These two ideas are inherently contradictory, and yet they are both extremely important to American political thought.
Fair question. To be honest, I am just a 20-something undergrad poli-sci student, and I probably am not the most equipped person to answer the question of what makes American political thought great, which I promise we will answer very shortly. But I do know enough to say that there are some thinkers, some more accomplished than I, who can provide a very accurate framework to analyze this question. And I think nobody fits that bill better than Maggie Nelson. In her seminal work on freedom, Maggie Nelson discussed a lot of things, mostly freedom. But she introduced a very important idea to the rest of this video, what she called the not. Basically, the idea is that freedom is inherently tied to unfreedom. You can never have one without the other. You can never have justice without injustice. By definition, they define each other. And the same idea applies here. Basically, we need, in order to define what makes American political thought great, we sort of need to define what makes it not great, which we've just done for the last, I don't know how many minutes. I haven't edited this yet. But we've just defined all these ways that American political thought is hard to nail down, is hard to define. But if we're using Maggie Nelson's idea of the not, this actually gives us a perfect opportunity to define what makes it great by these very limitations. So finally, all right, I'll just cut to the chase. It's contradictions. What makes American political thought great is its contradictions. It is an inherently difficult thing to describe, much less quantify as great or poor. And that is exactly why it's great. Because it means it is free. It means it is just. It means it's American. Maggie Nelson's concept of the knot gives us the perfect encapsulation of this. We cannot have freedom without unfreedom. We cannot have justice without injustice. And we cannot have great political thought without terrible political thought. That is what makes American political thought so great, is because it's hard to define. It's because it contradicts itself. It's because the answer is difficult. So, what makes American political thought great? I don't know. I don't know. And that's exactly the answer. Thank you.